He decided he won't, and now a jury will not hear from him. Is the jury allowed to draw any conclusions from that? Is it like taking the fifth?
Absolutely not. They will be instructed that a defendant has an absolute right to testify in his own trial and to decline to testify in his own trial. And any defendant who declines to testify, the jury may not consider it and may not draw any negative inferences against a defendant. That is the beauty of our Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. But really, the only thing that should surprise us, Steph, is that we still have the capacity to be surprised. Donald Trump said he would be testifying or at least interviewing with Bob Mueller, and he didn't. He said he would testify in both E. Jean Carroll trials. He testified in neither. Is it any surprise that he's been telling us all along he would testify in his own criminal trial in New York, and now he has told us all he won't be testifying? He couldn't withstand 10 seconds of cross-examination from those New York prosecutors. So whereas we have to embrace his right not to testify, it is pretty interesting that he can't even take the stand in his own defense, nor can he call any witnesses of consequence who can tell the jury that Donald Trump did nothing wrong. No exculpatory evidence, nothing exonerating. And indeed, the Bob Costello decision to call him, I think, was an enormous strategic blunder, because I think Bob Costello hurt the Trump defense more than he helped the Trump defense.
John, the American people will now have no sworn testimony from the first former president who is running for president charged with a crime. Can you even put that into context for us?
No.
In a word, no.
No, we're way far past where the buses run, as we say in the South. Look, I think one thing that has emerged from this is that the rule of law is being applied. Trump is sitting there. The gag order has been enforced, perhaps not as stringently as it would be for you or for me, but the mechanics of the constitutional order are going forward. And I think it's hard to say this, that we needed to send that message to the world, that American democracy was not totally broken. But I think that message is being sent.
Susan, the defense case took less than one single day. Does Donald Trump care more about the defense in the courtroom or the defense he gives outside the courtroom on the steps? I mean, did you actually hear anything significant from him?
Look, Donald Trump is always litigating in the court of public opinion. That is his primary venue. And of course, there's nothing illegal about lying to the public in the court of public opinion, as Donald Trump is so skillful at doing. And so, of course, it's not a surprise that he gaslights all of us and says he is terribly gagged and he's being deprived of his First Amendment rights and his rights to defend himself by the judge in the case, but then refuses to offer a substantive defense in the case. His litigation of this case, such as it is convincing people that even without knowing any specifics, it's hopelessly unfair, it's a kangaroo court. And that's a message that he's pounding over and over and over again, regardless of the facts in this particular case. And, I think to John's point, on the one hand, it's important to see the mechanisms of the law being applied to Donald Trump, a judge seeking to hold him accountable, a jury of perhaps not peers, but of regular citizens being called in. But, this is also a sideshow. Let's remember that the real cases involving Donald Trump are not, it appears, going to come into court and going to show the world that justice is being applied to Donald Trump when it comes to questions about seeking to overturn the 2020 election, when it comes to things like taking classified information that he wasn't allowed to have after he left the White House. Those questions will remain unresolved headed into the election. This is a case that's a very different and much narrower in nature.
Glenn, did the defense witnesses do anything to help Trump?
No, I think they affirmatively hurt Trump's cause. You know, when Costello was cross-examined by the prosecution with his own emails saying things like to Michael Cohen, you know, sleep well, you have friends in high places, and we need to keep Cohen on the same page. And then the one, Steph, that I think is priceless and is prosecutorial gold is the one you referred to in your lead-in, where Costello actually put in an email, Cohen continues to slow play us and the president. Is he totally nuts? What should I say to this a-hole? He is playing with the most powerful man on the planet. Steph, can I tell you, that's ordinarily not the way an attorney talks about his client or his potential client. What becomes clear from all of the cross-examination is that, you know, it looks like Bob Costello was trying to catch and capture or capture and kill the information that Michael Cohen could provide that would incriminate Donald Trump. This was a whole lot of ugliness. And I have to believe, you know, especially after Judge Merchan had to clear the courtroom because Bob Costello couldn't even comport himself as, you know, a respectful witness. He was showing, quote, contemptuous behavior. The jury is not going to miss all of the signs and signals from Bob Costello. And I can only believe that Donald Trump directed his defense attorneys to put Costello on the stand, because, as I say, it was an enormous strategic blunder.
John, there's two groups of people I want to ask you about. First is the jury. Yeah. Next week, this group of people, after a long, complex trial where they had to sit through long testimony with lots of conflict, they're going to have to make a historic decision. What kind of burden is on these 12 ordinary Americans?
It's enormous. And it's part of a tradition that stretches back to the 13th century. It's the common law. It's Magna Carta. It's that the defendants are given the right to be tried, and that juries render these verdicts. I'm glad I'm not there. But I think if you believe in the system for all of its imperfections, then the system moves on and unfolds.
I love that you always qualify that. If you believe in the system with all of its imperfections.
Well, it is, right? It's an imperfect system. But what, as Winston Churchill said, it's the worst of all forms of government except for all the others, right? How would you replace a trial by jury?
Well, what is your take on this other group of individuals, this Trump cheering squad, showing up almost in uniform, matching ties, performing for him? That almost feels un-American.
Well, it's a cult, right? The Republican Party is not a party at the moment. It's a cult. It really is. It's a personality-driven. And this is a once.
Did you ever think you, John Meacham, would be saying that about the Republican Party?
No.
Does that make you sad?
Of course it makes me sad. I have voted for Republicans for president. I've, look, I'm George H.W. Bush's biographer. I mean, talking about George H.W. Bush in this context is like talking about the Peloponnesian War. It's that far back, right? And so, no, but it is that. And you saw even when things kind of work, you sort of saw the tension, right? You saw Speaker Mike Johnson do the deal on Ukraine, educate himself, say he wanted to be on the right side of history. Everything you want from a public figure. And what does he do? He shows up in Manhattan to show his fealty. Now, he's facing voters. I understand the forces on that. I've never been on a ballot. I get it. But I get why. I get the reason he's doing it. I don't get the ultimate reason. What the party's doing right now is they are putting the short-term power incentives, short and middle-term power incentives, over the long-term good of the experiment they are sworn to protect. And that is a position that, look, I wouldn't want history to be judging me if I ended up having to pay fealty to Donald Trump.
What is your response to the ICC seeking an arrest warrant for you?
Well, I think my response is no different from President Biden, who said this is outrageous, and many people across the political spectrum in the United States and leaders of democratic countries around the world have called it exactly that. It's a rogue prosecutor who's out to demonize the one and only Jewish state. And he's doing that by first applying a false symmetry. He's equating Israel's democratically elected leaders with the terrorist tyrants of Hamas. That's like saying, well, I'm issuing arrest warrants for, after 9/11, I'm issuing arrest warrants for George Bush, but also for Osama bin Laden. And in World War II, I'm issuing arrest warrants for FDR, but also for Hitler. Thanks a lot. That's a false symmetry, and it's totally absurd. It's a travesty of justice. But the other thing he's doing, he's using also, Stephanie, just this point, he's using also false accusations. He's saying we're drying out Gaza. Drying out Gaza? We're supplying now, before the war, 7% of Gaza's water, now 45% of the water, nearly half to make sure they have water. He's saying that we have a deliberate policy of starvation. Deliberate policy. We supplied 500,000 tons of food and drugs, 20,000 trucks.
Yes,
We're fixing the roadbeds so those trucks can go in.
But we've already heard U.S. aid has said famine is present. We've heard from Cindy McCain, who runs the World Food Program, who has said there's massive famine there. Are you saying that they're lying?
I'm saying that Cindy McCain, unfortunately, is misinformed, and I'm saying that the facts prove otherwise. We flooded Gaza with humanitarian aid, but before that, we supplied it with more than minimal amounts. And we fixed the roadbeds, we fixed the border crossings to make sure that all this food and all these supplies go in. We've enabled airdrops, we've enabled maritime routes, we're building a port there. The whole thing of a deliberate starvation policy is ridiculous, and it's put forward by a guy who doesn't check his facts. He's receiving it, as do others, from the UNRWA and other anti-Israeli agencies and from Palestinian sources. Look, they said just recently that they discovered that, well, they sort of were misinformed, that 10,000 casualties that were supposed to be women and children, now they say, well, we don't know that. I mean,
sir,
so they're fixing it. You know, it takes time for the truth to come out.
We can't discount that there has been massive suffering and deaths. We see it with our own eyes. But, of course, the reason we're all here is because of what happened on October 7th, because of the hostages that are still being held. So let's talk about the path forward, because President Biden says that your failure to plan for who will govern Gaza has already allowed Hamas to pop back up in parts of Gaza. The IDF is now saying they're fighting Hamas again in northern Gaza. Why should the world believe that anything will be different after you go into Rafah, which will obviously cause more suffering?
Well, first of all, the suffering is something that we're concerned with, and Israel has gone to lengths that no other government and no other army in modern urban warfare has gone to prevent civilian casualties. For us, every civilian casualty is a tragedy. For Hamas, every civilian casualty is a strategy. They're trying to keep them in harm's way while we're trying to get them out of harm's way with millions of leaflets, phone calls, text messages, and so on, and largely succeeded. But of course not. It's not perfect. It's obvious. But we do our best, and therefore we're held to a standard that no other army has been held to in history. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in order to finish this, we have to eliminate the terrorist army, and 4 of its battalions, of its 24 battalions, are in Rafah. When we eliminate them, we'll be able to also get an alternative governance in Gaza. That's my goal, to eliminate Hamas, to ensure demilitarization of Hamas, and bring in Gazans who are not threatened anymore by Hamas and do not share its goal of destroying Israel to run the civilian administration. And the third thing would be to rebuild Gaza along peaceful lines with the help of moderate Arab states. That's a practical plan. But, Stephanie, it goes through victory. None of these plans have any meaning if you do not eliminate Hamas. And if we eliminate Hamas, then I think that peace is possible, prosperity is possible, the expansion of peace is possible. But we need to defeat Hamas and bring our hostages back home. They go together. We've already brought half of them back, and we'll bring the other half back. This is my goal, and this is what the vast majority of Israelis support.
And of course, the idea of peace is extraordinary, but the path to get there has been devastating. So I want to talk about the power of Hamas. Back in December, the New York Times reported that you encouraged payments to Hamas from Qatar shortly before the October 7th attack. Did you underestimate what Hamas was capable of doing?
Well, first of all, I did everything in my power to degrade Hamas's military power. I led 3 major military operations against Hamas, which eliminated about 6,000 of their fighters and some of their key leaders, but it didn't root them out. And I think what we're trying to do now is root them out, not have them resurge again, come back out of Rafah with their 4 battalions, retake the Gaza Strip, and then do what they vowed to do, to repeat the horrible October 7th massacre of raping women, beheading women, burning babies, taking hostages. They want to do it over and over again. We can't let them do it. As far as the money that was given to them, it was given to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe, to make sure that the water pumps work, that the sewage pumps work, the electricity works. That was the goal. But we did everything in our power to degrade their military power. Now we want to root them out and get a civilian administration that is not beholden to them and is not beholden to the idea of destroying Israel. That's the way forward.
That was the goal, sir. That was the goal. But October 7th happened, and now you're in a full-blown war. So did you underestimate what Hamas was capable of?
Well, we certainly were surprised on that day. There's no question about that. But we got back on our feet immediately, and we're driving Hamas out. We're doing it in the most difficult urban warfare conditions of modern times, because they have 35,000 terrorists in a dense urban area, 50 meters above ground, 50 meters in a terror tunnel system of 500 kilometers of terror tunnels. It's enormous. And I think they underestimated the fact that we could take them out once we turn things around, and we are. And we're committed to doing it, to finish it. It's not easy. We're getting a bum rap in the international scene. I mean, you have this travesty where the leaders of Israel are being called war criminals when we're fighting war criminals. We're fighting these genocidal Hamas monsters. And then a court that was set up to prevent the repeat of the Holocaust genocide and other such savageries is accusing Israel of such crimes. It's absurd. But, we have to, we have to fight it. The way we fight it is by fighting and winning, and we will.
Are you to blame for that bum rap? For 70 years, the Democratic Party in the United States, for the most part, was in lockstep with Israel until about a decade ago. Some Democrats blame you for that rift. What do you say to them?
Well, first of all, I value the bipartisan support, which is still quite substantial, and I think it's a mainstay of our policy, our national interest and our policy. Mind you, 80% of Americans, according to the Harvard-Harris poll, it's a tracking poll, and it's serious, and it shows that 80% of Americans identify with Israel and not with Hamas in this conflict, and that cuts across party lines. So that's very important. Now, it's true that there's a fringe element and the on the progressive fringes of the Democratic Party that doesn't identify with Israel. By the way, doesn't identify that much with America. And some of these people, support the demonstrations on the campuses. What do they chant on the campuses? They said, death to America, death to Israel. They burn American flags. And I think on the whole, this is not the Democratic Party. This is not the Republican Party. These are not the independents. This is not mainstream America. So mainstream America identifies with Israel. It's very important for me that they continue to do so, but it's got nothing to do with me. It's got a lot to do with them, where they're going, how they see the world. Most Americans understand one thing, that Israel and America stand for common values, for individual liberty, for individual rights. It doesn't make any difference if you're white or black or gay or straight or Israeli or Arab. You have individual human rights, but you also have the right of national protection and security. People understand that, they value that. They see Israel as part of America, and America as part of Israel, part of that same civilization. It hasn't changed. But for some people, they see it differently because they see America differently. So they see Israel differently. And I have to tell you, that doesn't represent the broad spectrum of American opinion. And as far as I'm concerned, maintaining this broad bipartisan support is an integral part of our policy, and we'll continue to do everything we can to keep it.
Well, you've had a very special relationship with Donald Trump, with his family. NBC News is reporting that you are currently engaged in close conversations with Trump's team. Can you confirm that?
I'm engaged in close conversations with President Biden's team, with former President Trump's people, anybody who comes here, Democrats, Republicans, every day, including, by the way, yesterday. You had Republicans and Democrats come here, and, I'm, and how should I say this? I'm an equal opportunity visitor and visited. And it's something that conforms to the basic policy that I said. I want to make sure that the broad spectrum of American policy is supports Israel, and that we're open to them, hear their concerns, but also let them hear our concerns. And I think that's the only productive policy. So I meet with everyone, and I'll continue to do so.
When was the last time you spoke to former President Trump or his son-in-law, Jared Kushner?
I saw Jared Kushner, I think 6 months ago, a few months ago. Former President Trump sent me a note when I won the elections, but we haven't spoken since. But again, I appreciate the support both of President Biden, what he said yesterday about this farce in the international court issuing warrants against the Prime Minister of Israel, the Defense Minister of Israel. I think when he said it's more than it's outrageous, he's right. And I appreciate the support that he's given us from the beginning of the war. Let me tell you, I also support and appreciate the support that I received from President Trump, that Israel received, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, declaring Jerusalem as our capital, recognizing our sovereignty over the Golan Heights. I think these are all important things. That's the continuity that I'd like to see continue.